It was a bright afternoon, and the store was full of people walking up and down the aisles. The sound of shopping carts rolling, children talking, and the beeping of the checkout counters filled the air. Angela, a hard-working woman in her mid-30s, walked into the store with a small list in her hand. She had a calm smile on her face, dressed neatly, and carried herself with quiet confidence. She came simply to buy some household items, nothing more, nothing less. Like any other customer, she just wanted to finish her shopping and return home to her family. The store manager, Karen, stood behind the counter with sharp eyes scanning the crowd. Karen had worked in the store for years, and though she was known for being strict, many had also noticed that she often treated certain customers differently. Her eyes fell on Angela the moment she entered. Instead of greeting her warmly as she did with others, she frowned slightly, as if something about Angela bothered her. Angela didn't notice at first. She was busy reading her list, walking toward the aisle with cleaning supplies. Angela moved slowly, carefully picking items off the shelves. She checked labels, compared prices, and sometimes paused to think before placing things into her cart. For her, shopping was not just about grabbing things quickly but making sure she bought what was truly needed and within her budget. She was thoughtful, patient, and focused. She hummed softly to herself as she walked down the aisle, unaware that someone was watching her every move. Karen, however, did not see an ordinary shopper. She leaned against the shelf at a distance, pretending to arrange products but actually keeping her eyes fixed on Angela. Every time Angela picked up a bottle, looked at it, and placed it back, Karen's suspicion grew. Her mind was filled with doubt, not reality. Instead of seeing a careful customer, she imagined something else entirely. She whispered to one of the cashiers nearby, "Keep an eye on her." The cashier looked surprised but nodded quietly, not daring to argue with the manager. Angela continued her shopping, still in her own world. She moved to the aisle with laundry products and spent a few minutes reading about detergents. She finally picked one and placed it in her cart. Then she headed toward the section where personal care products were kept. Everything about her behavior was normal, yet Karen kept her gaze sharp and her heart restless, as if waiting for Angela to do something wrong. Some shoppers noticed this strange attention. A young couple passing by caught Karen glaring at Angela. They exchanged looks, whispering to each other, "Why is the manager following that woman? She isn't doing anything." But they didn't speak out loud. They simply kept walking, though uneasiness filled their hearts. Angela soon headed to the grocery section of the store. She picked up a basket of fruits, some bread, and a bottle of juice. She checked her list again and nodded. She was almost done. Her movements were gentle, nothing rushed, nothing suspicious. She even smiled kindly at a little child who was sitting in a cart while his mother shopped nearby. The child laughed back, and Angela waved before moving on. Meanwhile, Karen grew more impatient. She tapped her foot, folded her arms, and stared harder. She convinced herself that Angela's careful way of shopping was a cover-up. She thought, "Why is she taking so long? Why does she keep checking things?" Instead of trusting her customers, she let her own doubts control her. Angela finally turned toward the front of the store where the checkout counters were. She placed her items neatly on the belt, ready to pay. She reached into her bag to take out her wallet. Everything seemed completely normal. But at that very moment, Karen made up her mind. She picked up the phone, her hand slightly trembling from her own assumptions. Without approaching Angela, without asking her anything, she dialed the local police and reported what she thought was suspicious behavior. Angela, still unaware of what was happening, smiled at the cashier and greeted her politely. She placed her fruits, bread, juice, and other items carefully. The cashier scanned them one by one, and the machine beeped gently with every item. Angela waited patiently, holding her wallet ready. She didn't know that behind her, Karen had just made a phone call that would change the entire mood of the store. The minutes ticked by, and while Angela was busy paying, Karen stood stiff near the counter. Her eyes were fixed on the door, waiting for the police to arrive. She felt certain she had done the right thing. But around her, whispers started spreading. A few customers had overheard her conversation with the police. They looked at Angela, then at Karen, and confusion grew among them. Angela didn't fit the image of someone causing trouble. She was simply another shopper. Angela took her receipt, thanked the cashier, and picked up her bags. She was about to leave when she noticed Karen staring directly at her with a strange expression. For a moment, Angela paused, wondering why. But she shook off the thought. Perhaps the manager was just having a bad day, she assumed. She smiled politely and continued walking toward the exit. Karen's heart raced. She kept telling herself she had done the right thing. But a small doubt crept into her mind. What if she was wrong? What if Angela was just an ordinary shopper like everyone else? She pushed the thought away, choosing instead to trust her own fears rather than the truth before her eyes. The quiet tension in the store grew heavier. People sensed that something was not right. The calm afternoon was about to shift into something larger, something that no one had expected. Angela, with her shopping bags in hand, was just a few steps away from leaving peacefully. But Karen's decision to call the police would soon pull her back into a storm she did not create. Angela adjusted her bags and walked slowly, thinking about the dinner she would cook once she got home. She imagined her children's happy faces when they saw the fresh bread and juice she had bought. Her mind was far from any trouble. But outside the store, 2 police cars had already pulled up, and officers were preparing to step in. The story of that afternoon had only begun, and within minutes, everything was about to change. What started as an ordinary shopping trip for Angela would turn into an unforgettable moment that would test her patience, her strength, and her dignity. Angela's steps were steady as she walked toward the exit, carrying her shopping bags in both hands. She had no idea that outside the glass doors, 2 police cars had already pulled up. The flashing lights reflected faintly on the windows, catching the attention of some customers who were still inside. A murmur spread across the store as people began to realize what was happening. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking questions in soft voices. The parents shook their heads quietly, unsure how to explain. Angela paused just before reaching the door, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. Her mind was far from trouble. She was thinking about dinner, about her children waiting at home, about how she still needed to stop by the pharmacy before heading back. She smiled gently to herself, ready to leave. But in that moment, the automatic doors slid open, and 2 uniformed officers walked inside. Their eyes searched the store, sharp and alert, as if expecting to confront someone dangerous. Karen straightened her posture immediately when she saw them. She walked quickly toward the officers, her expression serious, as though she had just uncovered something important. She pointed discreetly toward Angela and whispered something that made the officer's eyes focus on her. Angela, holding her bags peacefully, noticed the sudden shift in the atmosphere. She saw the officers walking toward her and felt a wave of confusion rush through her chest. One officer raised a hand politely but firmly. "Ma'am, could you stop for a moment?" His voice carried authority, and Angela froze. She turned slowly, looking from one officer to the other, then at Karen who stood behind them with folded arms. The store grew silent, the normal chatter of shopping replaced by curious whispers and the sound of phones being pulled out. Several customers had already started recording the scene, sensing that something unusual was about to unfold. Angela's voice was calm but filled with uncertainty. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked softly. She held her bags a little tighter, her heart beating faster even though she knew she had done nothing wrong. The officer glanced at his partner, then looked back at her. "We received a call about suspicious behavior." We just need to ask you a few questions. Angela blinked, confused. She looked down at her bags and then back at them. Suspicious behavior, she repeated, her tone almost disbelieving. She had receipts for everything in her hand. She had gone through the checkout like any other shopper. She hadn't broken a single rule. Behind the officers, Karen stood tall, her lips pressed together. She gave a small nod, as if confirming she had done her duty. Some customers looked at her with disbelief, whispering to each other, "What is she talking about? That woman just paid for everything. I saw it." Another shopper, a middle-aged man in a baseball cap, shook his head slowly, muttering under his breath, "This isn't right." Angela, still keeping her composure, carefully placed her bags on the floor and reached into her purse. She pulled out the long paper receipt and handed it to the officer. "Here," she said gently, "I just paid for everything. You can check." The officer scanned the receipt quickly. His brows furrowed slightly, then relaxed as he looked at the items in her bags. Everything matched perfectly. There was nothing hidden, nothing suspicious, nothing stolen. The partner officer also leaned in, comparing the list with the contents. He gave a small nod. "Everything seems fine," one officer said, almost sounding surprised. He turned toward Karen. "Ma'am, are you sure about your report?" Karen stiffened. She crossed her arms tightly and replied, "Yes, I'm sure." She was acting suspicious. Walking around slowly, checking items, putting them back, then picking them up again. "I know what I saw." Angela's lips parted slightly. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the accusation, but she remained calm. She spoke clearly, her voice strong but respectful. "I was shopping carefully, checking prices. That's all. Isn't that what any customer does? I paid for everything. I have done nothing wrong." The officer nodded slowly, understanding her words. Around them, more customers began speaking up. A young woman with her phone recording said loudly, "I saw her shopping. She didn't do anything suspicious. She was just looking at things like anyone else." Another customer added, "She even smiled at my child earlier. There was nothing wrong with her behavior. This is ridiculous." The officers began to realize the weight of the situation. They stood straighter, their eyes shifting between Angela, the witnesses, and Karen. The tension in the store grew heavier, but Angela remained composed. She picked up her bags again, holding them close to her side. She looked directly at the officers and said, "I would like to know why I was stopped in front of everyone for simply shopping. Is careful shopping now suspicious?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. No one answered immediately. The officers avoided her gaze, clearly uncomfortable. Customers murmured their agreement, some shaking their heads at the unfairness of it all. Karen, however, did not back down. She muttered under her breath, "I was just doing my job." But even as she said it, doubt crept into her eyes. The evidence was clear, Angela had done nothing wrong. The customers were speaking against her. The officers were no longer treating the situation with urgency. Karen felt a lump form in her throat, though she refused to admit it out loud. Angela took a slow, deep breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue harshly. Instead, she carried herself with dignity. "I am a customer here, just like anyone else. I came to shop, and I paid for my things. I shouldn't be treated like this because of assumptions." The officers exchanged glances again. One of them cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to Angela, "thank you for your patience. We can see you have your receipt and items. You're free to go." His voice softened, almost apologetic. Angela nodded silently, though inside she felt a mix of relief and sadness. She picked up her bags and straightened her shoulders. Her calmness impressed the people around her. Some even clapped quietly in support, while others shook their heads at Karen's behavior. Karen's face flushed as she realized the situation was slipping out of her hands. What she had expected to be a justified act was turning into something else entirely. Customers were recording. The officers had found no wrongdoing. And Angela, the woman she had suspected, stood taller than ever, with grace and strength that made Karen's own actions look smaller by comparison. The moment was not just about shopping anymore. It was about dignity, fairness, and truth standing against false judgment. Angela walked past the officers, past Karen, and toward the doors once more. The store was silent except for the clicking of phone cameras and the whispers of people saying, "She didn't deserve that and this will not end well for the manager." Outside, the sunlight hit Angela's face as she stepped into the open air. She took another deep breath, holding her bags firmly. She didn't know yet that within minutes, videos of the incident would begin to spread across the internet, and the truth of what happened would reach far beyond the walls of that store. But for now, she carried her dignity with her, walking away while behind her, Karen stood frozen, realizing that what she had set in motion was far from over. Angela's hands tightened on the shopping bags as she walked out of the automatic doors, but she had only taken a few steps outside when she heard someone call after her. One of the officers jogged lightly to catch up. "Ma'am, could you wait a moment?" he asked, his voice carrying more respect this time than before. Angela stopped, turned, and faced him calmly. Her heart still beat fast from the sudden humiliation she had faced inside, but she didn't let it show. She stood tall, looking directly into the officer's eyes. The officer explained that he and his partner needed to close the situation properly, to make sure everything was clear. Angela nodded slowly. She understood procedure, but inside she felt the sting of being treated differently for no reason. She thought of the customers who had witnessed it, of the cameras recording everything, and of Karen, the manager, who had stood so sure of herself while accusing her. Back inside the store, Karen's nerves were beginning to show. She had expected the officers to find something wrong with Angela, something that would justify her call. Instead, they had discovered nothing. Angela had receipts, bags, and a calm manner. The witnesses had spoken against Karen. And now, instead of looking like a responsible manager, she looked like someone who had overstepped. The tension inside the store grew heavier. Customers stood near the checkout area, whispering among themselves. Some had their phones raised, recording every detail, while others simply shook their heads in disbelief. A woman holding a toddler whispered to her husband, "She was only shopping. Why would anyone think she was doing something wrong?" The husband sighed and replied, "Because sometimes people judge before they see the truth." Angela re-entered the store with the officer by her side, her step slow but steady. All eyes turned toward her again. She did not lower her head, she did not appear weak. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, showing dignity. She knew people were watching, but she wanted them to see her as she was, innocent, calm, and strong. The officer asked her gently if she could show the receipt again, this time in front of everyone so that the report would be officially closed. Angela obliged without hesitation. She placed her bags on the counter, unfolded her receipt, and handed it to the officer. The cashier who had checked her out earlier leaned forward, speaking up clearly, "Yes, she paid for everything right here. I scanned each item myself." The officer compared the list once more, then nodded firmly. "Everything checks out," he announced in a clear voice that carried across the store. "This customer has done nothing wrong." A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people clapped softly, while others voiced their agreement out loud. "We knew it," one woman said. "She was innocent all along." Another man muttered, "The manager should be ashamed." Angela stood silently through it all. Her eyes were calm, though her heart ached inside. She had not wanted attention, had not wanted to be at the center of a scene. She had only come to buy groceries. Yet now, everyone was looking at her, seeing how she handled herself. And she refused to let them see her break. Karen, however, could not stay silent. She stepped forward, her voice sharp though it wavered slightly. "I was only doing my job. I had to make sure nothing wrong was happening." Her words rang out, but instead of support, they met with disapproval. A customer near the entrance spoke up, his voice firm. "No, you were judging her for no reason. We all saw it. She did nothing wrong." Others nodded in agreement. "You followed her around like she was a criminal. She was just shopping. That was unfair." The voices grew stronger, one after another, until the room was filled with criticism directed at Karen. Angela finally spoke, her tone soft yet powerful. "You could have asked me if you had doubts. You could have spoken to me directly. But instead, you chose to call the police. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Do you know how that feels?" Her words carried weight, not anger, but pain that everyone could hear. The officer beside her looked uncomfortable, shifting on his feet. His partner stood near Karen, watching silently. The cashier lowered her eyes, clearly unhappy with what her manager had done. Customers kept their phones raised, capturing every moment, knowing this was something that would not stay inside the walls of the store. Angela picked up her bags again. "I am leaving now," she said, her voice steady. "But I hope you understand that what happened here was wrong." She looked directly at Karen as she said it. Karen avoided her gaze, her face pale, her hands fidgeting at her sides. As Angela walked toward the exit once more, a small ripple of applause broke out among the customers. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to show support. People admired the way she had handled herself with grace. Angela offered a small nod to those who clapped, then stepped outside once more, this time without being stopped. But the incident did not end there. Within minutes, the videos taken by customers began to appear online. One clip showed Angela standing calmly with her receipt, proving she had done nothing wrong. Another showed Karen pointing at her and whispering to the police. Others captured the voices of customers defending Angela and criticizing the manager. The videos spread quickly, reaching thousands of views in less than an hour. Back inside the store, Karen felt the shift in the air. She could see people whispering while staring at her. She could feel the weight of the cameras, the silent judgment pressing down on her. She tried to continue her duties, but her hands shook as she arranged items on the counter. She knew deep inside that this was not going to disappear quietly. Angela, meanwhile, walked to her car slowly, her mind heavy. She placed her bags inside, sat behind the wheel, and took a deep breath. She felt relief that she had handled the situation without losing control, but she also felt a deep sadness. She wondered how many others had gone through moments like this, moments of being judged unfairly for no reason. She shook her head softly, whispering to herself, "I will not let this break me." Her phone buzzed. A message from a friend appeared, along with a video link. "Is this you?" the friend asked. Angela clicked, and there she was standing in the store, holding her receipt, surrounded by police, Karen, and customers. She sighed deeply, realizing the incident had already left the store and entered the world outside. The story was no longer hers alone. It now belonged to everyone who watched, everyone who cared about fairness, and everyone who believed in dignity. And while Angela sat quietly in her car, Karen inside the store began to realize that the choice she had made to call the police without reason would bring consequences she had never imagined. The confrontation was over, but the story was only beginning to grow. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when Angela drove away from the store, but her mind was far from peaceful. The whole incident kept replaying in her head like a film she couldn't pause. She gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, trying to calm her breathing. She had been through uncomfortable moments before, but rarely had she been put in such a public spotlight for doing absolutely nothing wrong. Still, she reminded herself over and over that she had remained calm, that she had walked with dignity, and that she had shown others what strength looked like. Inside the store, the tension did not fade after Angela left. In fact, it grew heavier. Customers were still whispering and shaking their heads. Some lingered purposely, as if waiting to see what would happen next. A group of teenagers huddled near the self-checkout, their phones still recording, while a middle-aged woman stood near the counter, saying loudly to another shopper, "I hope the company sees this. That manager shouldn't be working here after what she did." Karen tried to continue as if nothing had happened. She told the cashiers to get back to work, instructed a stockboy to refill a shelf, and moved quickly between counters as though keeping busy could erase what had just occurred. But no matter where she went, she felt eyes on her. She caught the stares of customers, the sideways glances of her own staff, and the silent judgment that followed her every step. Her throat felt dry, and her hands trembled slightly each time she picked up a pen or clipboard. The officers, after closing their short report, left quietly. But before going, one of them spoke softly to Karen, his voice carrying both disappointment and warning. "Next time, ma'am, be very sure before making such a call. We came here expecting something serious, but this wasn't right." The word stung, and Karen clenched her jaw, pretending not to care, though inside her chest a heavy knot began to form. Meanwhile, outside of the store's walls, the story was already beginning to travel farther than Karen could imagine. Videos posted online spread from phone to phone, then from one social media platform to another. Each clip carried the same clear message: an innocent woman had been wrongly accused and humiliated, yet had carried herself with grace. Comments began flooding in. Some people wrote words of support for Angela. Others criticized the manager harshly. The store's logo, visible in many of the recordings, made sure everyone knew exactly where the incident had happened. Angela's phone did not stop buzzing. Friends called her, worried, asking if she was all right. Messages poured in from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Some were angry on her behalf, while others simply said they were proud of how she had handled herself. Angela answered only a few, keeping her responses calm. She didn't want to dwell on anger, she wanted peace. But deep inside, she knew this story was no longer just about her. It was about something larger. Back at the company's headquarters, news reached the higher management almost immediately. The customer service department began receiving phone calls, emails, and messages. Complaints arrived one after another, each pointing to the same incident at the same store, describing the same unfair treatment. Supervisors quickly alerted their directors. Within hours, executives were already watching the viral videos themselves, their faces tight with concern. The brand prided itself on customer respect. Public trust was everything. But now, on the screens before them, they watched a woman being stopped in front of police for no reason, a manager pointing fingers without evidence, and customers calling out discrimination. The executives exchanged looks, knowing this could not be ignored. Back in the store, Karen tried to keep her composure, but every minute became heavier. She could not ignore the quiet cashier who avoided meeting her eyes, or the murmurs of two stockboys who whispered near the supply room. Even some regular customers she recognized shook their heads at her when walking past. The respect she once carried as a manager had thinned like smoke. Angela, at home now, tried to return to normal life. She unpacked her groceries, placed bread on the counter, put juice in the refrigerator, and folded the receipt carefully, as if saving it as proof of her innocence. Her children gathered around, asking questions she tried to answer gently. "Why were police talking to you, Mom?" one of them asked. Angela knelt down, hugged her child, and simply said, "Sometimes people make mistakes about others. But what matters is how we handle it." She kissed their foreheads, hiding her deeper emotions, wanting to protect them from the heaviness of the world. While Angela tried to move forward, the storm grew louder outside. Within the span of just 5 minutes, the videos reached local news reporters. Soon after, blogs and online magazines picked up the story. Headlines began forming: customer accused without reason at local store, viral video shows manager calling police on innocent woman. Angela's face, calm and strong in the footage, became a symbol of patience under pressure. Back in the store, Karen's phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications. She finally looked and saw that her own name had begun circulating online. Someone had tagged her photo, captured during the confrontation. Comment after comment criticized her, some calling her unprofessional, others saying she represented exactly what was wrong with unfair judgment. Her stomach sank as she read, but she quickly shoved the phone into her pocket. She told herself it would pass, that things online always came and went. But her shaking hands betrayed her fear. Corporate management, however, did not see it as something to brush aside. A regional manager was dispatched immediately to the store. When the black car pulled into the parking lot that evening, whispers spread quickly among the staff. Karen saw the manager step out and felt her knees weaken. She straightened her uniform, wiped her palms against her skirt, and forced a steady expression. She hoped to explain, to justify, to defend. The regional manager entered, his face set in stone. He did not stop to greet customers, nor did he smile at the employees. He walked straight to Karen and asked her, in a voice low but firm, to step into the office. Karen followed, her throat dry, her mind racing with excuses. She tried to prepare sentences that might save her position. But inside the office, the regional manager sat across from her and laid it out clearly. "We've seen the videos. We've received countless complaints. This situation has already reached our headquarters. What you did today was unacceptable, and it has damaged this store's reputation. Customers are furious. The company's name is being dragged through the news because of this." His words were heavy, each one striking Karen like a stone. Karen tried to defend herself, saying she had only wanted to protect the store. But the regional manager shook his head. Protecting the store means handling situations with fairness and respect. It doesn't mean calling the police on a customer who was simply shopping. You embarrassed her, you embarrassed this company, and you embarrassed yourself. Karen's voice cracked as she attempted to explain further, but the manager lifted a hand, stopping her. "There is nothing more to explain. Actions have consequences. You are being relieved of your position, effective immediately." Her breath caught in her chest. Fired. The word echoed in her mind like thunder. She tried to protest, but the manager was already standing, signaling that the decision was final. Back outside, the store carried an unusual quietness. Employees knew what had happened. Customers whispered to each other, some saying, "It's about time," while others shook their heads in disbelief. The air felt different now. At home, Angela received another call. This time it was from a company representative, offering their apology. They explained that action had already been taken, that the manager involved would no longer be in charge, and that they wanted to make things right. Angela listened quietly, her heart heavy but her spirit strong. She did not seek revenge, but she felt relief knowing that fairness had prevailed. That evening, as she sat by the window sipping tea, she reflected on the day. She thought of how quickly an ordinary shopping trip had turned into something so big, and how within just a few hours the truth had reached thousands of people. She smiled faintly to herself. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't lost her composure, and yet her calmness had spoken louder than anything else. The turning point had come. Justice was moving in its own way, and Karen's decision to act unfairly had circled back to her faster than she ever imagined. The night settled slowly over the city, but the story of what had happened inside that store was still spreading like fire. On every social media platform, clips of the incident continued to gain thousands of views. People shared their thoughts, some with anger, others with sadness, but almost everyone with the same conclusion: Angela had been treated unfairly, and the manager had crossed a line. Angela sat quietly in her living room, her children asleep in their rooms. She sipped warm tea, the soft glow of the lamp casting light on her thoughtful face. Her phone buzzed with new notifications every few seconds, but she didn't check them all. Instead, she scrolled slowly, reading some of the supportive comments. Strangers she had never met were writing things like, "You are so strong for how you handled that," and "Thank you for showing patience instead of anger." Their words touched her heart, though she remained humble. She never asked to be seen as strong or brave, she had only done what felt right in the moment. But while Angela sat in her quiet home, Karen's world was collapsing. She left the store late that evening, her belongings hastily packed into a box. For years, she had walked through those doors with authority, giving instructions, correcting mistakes, carrying the title of manager. Now, she walked out with trembling hands, her eyes burning with unshed tears. The regional manager's words echoed in her mind: "You embarrassed the company. You embarrassed yourself." She sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time, staring at the wheel. The lot was nearly empty, the street lights glowing dimly against the pavement. She thought about how one decision, one phone call, had destroyed everything she had built. She had acted quickly, without thinking, and now she had lost her position, her respect, and perhaps her career. Regret pressed down on her like a heavy blanket she couldn't shake off. Meanwhile, Angela's story continued to grow. Local news stations aired the clips, interviewing some of the customers who had been in the store that afternoon. One woman said firmly on camera, "Angela was just shopping like anyone else. There was no reason to treat her that way." Another man added, "I saw it all with my own eyes. She was polite, calm, and had her receipt." The manager had no excuse. Their words only fueled the public's reaction. The company itself issued an official statement the next morning. In it, they apologized to Angela by name, admitted the situation was handled wrongly, and confirmed that the manager had been removed from her position. They promised to provide further training to all employees on how to treat customers with fairness and respect. The statement was shared widely online, with people commenting that it was the right step, though many added that it should have never happened in the first place. Angela read the statement on her phone, then set it down with a deep sigh. She didn't care about headlines or news stories. What mattered to her was the message behind it: truth had been recognized, and justice had been served. She hoped it would prevent others from going through the same experience. Her children noticed the change the next day. On their way to school, one of them said, "Mom, you're famous now." My friend's mom showed her the video, and she said you were really brave. Angela smiled softly and replied, "I'm not famous, sweetheart. I just stood up for myself in a calm way. That's something we should all try to do when life isn't fair." Her words stayed with her children, teaching them an unspoken lesson about dignity, patience, and strength. As for Karen, her regret grew heavier with every passing day. She saw her name in articles online, criticized by strangers who had never met her. Former co-workers avoided her messages, not wanting to be connected to the scandal. Even her friends grew quiet, unsure of what to say. She sat in her apartment at night, staring at the news stories that used to be about other people, and now were about her. She had made a choice in a moment of bias, and it had cost her everything. Angela, however, chose not to dwell on Karen's downfall. She carried herself forward with quiet grace. She returned to her daily routines, going to work, caring for her children, visiting the grocery store again when needed. But something inside her had shifted. She realized that her story had touched people far beyond her small world. She had shown that even in the face of unfairness, calmness and truth had the power to win. Weeks later, Angela was invited to speak at a community meeting. The topic was fairness in public spaces, and many people gathered to share their thoughts. When Angela stood at the front of the room, her voice was steady but gentle. She didn't speak with anger. She spoke with wisdom. "I never asked to be part of a story like this," she began. "I only went shopping that day. But when something unfair happened, I chose to stay calm. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I knew anger would not help. Dignity is sometimes the strongest answer we can give." The audience listened closely, many nodding with respect. Her words reached hearts, reminding them that real strength is not always loud, it can also be quiet, patient, and firm. Angela walked away from that meeting knowing that her experience had become more than just a viral video. It had become a lesson for others. She didn't feel proud of the pain she had gone through, but she did feel grateful that her example might help prevent someone else from facing the same. Karen, on the other hand, eventually moved out of town, trying to escape the shadow of her mistake. She searched for new jobs, but interviews always ended awkwardly once her past was mentioned. She carried her regret like a constant companion, realizing too late that fairness, respect, and kindness were worth far more than suspicion or control. The story remained alive in the community for a long time. People remembered Angela as the woman who stood tall, even when falsely accused. They remembered her composure, her soft but firm words, and the way she walked out of the store with her head held high. In the end, Angela returned to her peaceful life, surrounded by the love of her children and the respect of strangers who had become supporters. She never sought fame, never asked for recognition, but her dignity had spoken for her. The incident had started with unfair suspicion, but it ended with truth, justice, and an unforgettable reminder: treating others with respect is not optional, it is necessary. And those who fail to understand that often face consequences they never imagined. Angela knew one thing clearly. She had walked through fire without letting it burn her spirit. And for her, that was enough.